The art supply closet was off down a hallway behind my desk, but I was too afraid of getting caught. So I turned to the only other place that I knew had art department supplies, whether Sammy approved of it or not. The sheet music closet in the music department. That was an advantage. Being the gopher meant that folks were used to me walking around in different parts of the studio and doing whatever I was doing. I figured this would make my task pretty easy, but I still wanted to wait until lunch when I was alone. Which I did. I waited 5 minutes or so, making sure no one came back all of a sudden because they'd forgot their hat or something. And then I got up from my desk and made my way down to the music department, through the winding path of hallways and to the closet. I glanced back up at the hallway and then down the other direction that led, well, I didn't really know. I'd never gone farther than the closet before, and I assumed it must lead to some sort of dead end eventually. Then again, this place was so maze-like. Maybe there was something else deep in the shadows. I grinned, thinking maybe there was a sphinx or something guarding a secret entrance, quizzing employees and choosing if it would let them past. No more imagining. Stop it, buddy. I quickly unlocked the closet door, went inside, and pulled the chain for the light. I leaned down and picked up a small stack of thick, crisp white paper. The difference in quality between kinds of paper was amazing. I hadn't thought much about it before I'd started working here. And then I looked around for ink. There was a cardboard box on the floor, and I opened it carefully. There they were, little glass bottles full of black. I gingerly pulled one out. I still needed a pen. It was while I was searching the narrow shelves that I heard the voices. I froze in place and listened hard. You'd think with my big ears I'd have a better sense of hearing, but the way they stuck out so much never seemed to make a difference. But I could tell at least, like anyone probably could have, that the voices were coming from the dark part of the hall, not the music department. I was starting to get anxious. I couldn't get caught. If I did, I'd definitely be fired. I needed the job, and I was starting to really regret doing this. I slipped inside the closet and closed the door behind me, and then I pulled the chain for the light and stood stock still with an armful of paper in the pitch darkness. The voices got louder and I could hear footsteps now. They were almost right there in front of my door before they stopped. There was the sound of a scuffle. "Don't grab me again, Mr. Lawrence," said a stern voice I didn't recognize. "Then listen to me when I'm talking to you." That definitely was Sammy's voice, that one I knew for sure. It was lower than the frantic cries I'd heard on our first encounter, but it had that same edge to it. Always just a little angry. "I've heard you and I don't believe you," said the other voice. "Why not?" It was almost a squeak the way he said it. "I've seen you sneaking around my workstation. I've seen you at the machine. Last Friday you asked my worker where we kept the ink, so don't you go on about being all innocent. I'm going to Mr. Drew." "Tom, come on. Why would I want your ink?" asked Sammy. "Tom, I still didn't know who that was." "It's Mr. Connor," replied Tom coldly. "Why can't I call you Tom?" "Because we're not friends, and you will give me the respect I deserve." There was a long pause then. I couldn't decide if I wanted the two of them to move on down the hall already or for them to stick around so I could hear more. When Sammy didn't say anything, Tom added, "What's the matter, Mr. Lawrence? Not used to giving someone like me respect?" "What's that mean, someone like you?" Sammy's tone had gone from angry to threatening. "You know what it means," replied Tom. There was a long pause. "Leave me alone," said Sammy. I heard the sound of footsteps as he marched away back down the dark part of the hallway. "Leave my ink alone," Tom called out after him. I was suddenly very aware of the small inkwell in my hands. It seemed much heavier than it had a moment ago. I was also aware now of how loud my breath sounded in the small confined space. I had no idea that ink was so important, and that it was so important to Tom Connor. That man I'd seen only once before, waiting for Mr. Drew that first day. Tom let out a huff outside my door, and finally I heard his boots also stomping off in the direction of the dark hallway. I kept still, straining to hear more footsteps, to see if either of them was coming back, But the longer I waited, I realized the more likely it was someone eventually would come by, and lunch was probably going to be over soon anyway. So I had no other choice. I carefully opened the door. No one. Quickly, I turned around and grabbed the first refillable pen I could find, and then I was out of there, locking the door behind me, dashing back to my desk, and hiding the supplies in the garbage bin under it. I sat there, still for a moment, and then took in a deep breath. I was more scared than I'd been at first. Sure, stealing wasn't something I was keen on, but I really didn't think that ink was such a big deal. Not like Tom was making it out to be. I felt the key in my pocket. I stood and headed for the elevator just as it opened, and Jacob came back from lunch. "Hey, buddy," he said as he passed, all casual, like nothing weird was going on in the studio. Probably because he didn't know. Probably because I was overthinking it. I went down a level to Story and luckily found Dot at her desk, her sandwich unwrapped before her, her head bent so low over her paper her nose was practically touching it. I wasn't sure if it was right to interrupt her, but she made the decision for me. With one swift movement, she was suddenly sitting up looking at me. "Whoa, you scared me," I said, taking a step back.
"I scared you? You were the one sneaking up on me," replied Dot, matter of fact.
"Yeah, I guess."
"What's going on?"
she asked, looking at me closely like she was trying to read my brain. I looked over my shoulder, but no one was nearby. "I wanted to return, you know." Dot nodded and opened her drawer. I quickly dropped the key inside and she bent over, placing it between the pages of a book. "The Complete Works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle," it said, in gold lettering on the cover.
"Thanks."
I just stood there. I couldn't decide if I should tell her what I'd heard.
"So, did you get what you needed?"
she asked after a moment. "Yeah." I didn't know what to say. Maybe I was just panicking about being a thief now.
"What's on your mind, buddy?"
she asked, leaning back in her chair. "Okay, fine." "Do you know anything about a man named Tom Connor?" I asked quietly. Dot thought about it for a moment.
"I don't think so."
"Well, I just overheard him and Sammy talking about ink."
"Ink?"
"Yeah, it sounded like this Tom guy thought Sammy was stealing ink." I remembered something else then. "And also, there was talk of a machine."
"Machine?"
Dot furrowed her eyebrows at me.
"What kind of machine?"
"I don't know. I just was curious because, well, as you know, I lowered my voice to a whisper even though no one was close by. "I just stole some ink, and I'm worried this could be a bigger deal than we thought." Dot shook her head.
"No, that's silly."
I didn't like that. It wasn't silly. She wouldn't be thinking that if she'd heard what I'd heard.
"I'll look into it,"
she said. "You don't have to. I just was wondering if you knew," I said, but I didn't say it too forcefully. Dot was really good at looking into things, and I appreciated any help here.
"No, I want to."
She glanced over my shoulder then, and I turned around. Mike, one of the writers, had just come off the elevator.
"Let me know what accounting has to say, but there's no hurry,"
she said loudly, and I quickly realized we were pretending now. "Of course." I turned around and passed Mike, who gave me a sideways look as he took off his jacket and sat at his desk. He pulled the brim of his hat lower down and tipped his chair back onto its rear legs, picked up something he'd been working on, and began to read it over. I made it back to the art department just in time to be sent on an actual task to the music department. The last thing I wanted to do was see Sammy. But fortunately, he kept to himself, sitting on his stool at the conductor's stand looking over notes and muttering. Beside him was a half-empty bottle of ink. Normally, I'd never have paid much attention to something like that, but now I stared at it for a moment, wondering. I shook my head and quickly dropped off the folder I'd been given in the inbox by the door and turned to leave. Maybe I should just ask. Maybe there was a way I could ask. I turned back. The ink bottle was now empty. How? "What do you want, art department?" asked Sammy, suddenly looking up at me. "Nothing, just left a folder for you," I said, backing away quickly. "Fantastic," he replied, looking back down at his work. I left immediately, feeling deeply unsettled. It wasn't just being snapped at, I was used to him being unpredictable. It wasn't even what I'd heard him say earlier either. It was that I could have sworn, when he'd turned to face me, that there had been a small bit of black in the right-hand corner of his mouth.